Use Advisory Council operations for COVID-19 and also updates from our program staff. So at this time, I will turn it over to Jim Milne.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Before I get started, is everybody able to see the slides? It should say Eagle Agency Update.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is the agency update for Eagle's water use program. And bear with me a second. I'm negotiating two screens here to get my speaker notes. Okay, I'm going to start out by talking on a big picture scale about how Eagle is currently functioning during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then I'm going to present some program metrics for the program year 11. And the water use program year runs from July 2019, year 11 runs from July 2019 to March. So far, updates through the end of March 2020. The program year itself runs July 9th through July 8th of the following calendar year. I'm going to briefly describe how the Eagle Water Use Program staff are working remotely and what you can expect in terms of interactions with the water use program staff. Then I'm going to share some good news and some bad news about personnel issues in the water use program. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Eagle staff are following the Stay Safe guidance while we're performing our duties to protect human health and the environment. Most staff, with the exceptions of the Eagle lab staff, are working remotely from their homes. Travel has been restricted to essential travel to protect human health, safety, and the environment. So you're going to see a reduced Eagle presence. Most of the Eagle presence you're going to observe would be our field staff who are still out there issuing permits and conducting essential inspections. Eagle staff are maintaining safe distances from other people, and you'll see us wearing protective equipment like masks and gloves. Meetings are either being canceled, rescheduled, or they're being held remotely like this council meeting. And we're constantly adapting to continue to perform our essential duties in a safe manner. As I said, the program year runs from July 9th to July 8th of the following calendar year. So these totals are for the period from July 2019 through the end of March 2020. And the statutory deadline for making conventional site-specific review decisions is 10 business days. So to date, we've received a total of 112 site-specific reviews. For those that are not familiar with how that works, we have an online water withdrawal assessment screening tool. The water users are able to put their information in about their proposed use. And if they can pass the screening tool, they're able to print a registration receipt and they're good to go without needing to wait for any further official approval from Eagle. If they aren't able to pass the water withdrawal assessment tool, then they have the option of requesting a site-specific review by Eagle staff, or there's an alternative analysis process that they can hire a consultant to do an analysis and then send it to Eagle for our review and approval. So, and the purpose of a site-specific review is where Eagle staff review all the available information in the area, make a decision about whether we agree with the water withdrawal assessment tool, or if we're able to authorize a withdrawal either as proposed, or if it can't be approved as proposed, try to work with the water user to come up with a modified use that will meet both their water use needs and avoid creating an adverse resource impact to fish or stream flow. So of those 112 SSRs, To date, we've got 14 decisions that have not been made within 10 days. Actually, those are including some from prior years as well. So our backlog has been reduced to a total of 14 files. And our timeliness metrics, we're making 87.5% of our site-specific review decisions within that 10-day time frame. The average number of days to reach a SSR decision is 8.2. These compliance metrics are for the period between July 2019 through the end of March 2020. When we send out a compliance communication, that's a relatively minor violation where there's still available stream flow to authorize a use, or we're requesting additional information, which I'll talk about a little further here. So amended registrations are for large quantity withdrawals that were installed and or operated differently than what were authorized either by the tool or by a site-specific review, but they're in watersheds where there is enough stream flow available to authorize the use as it is built and as it is operated. When I say after the fact registrations, those are issued when we have enough stream flow available to authorize unregistered large quantity withdrawals after the fact. And when we talk about missing pump information, that's where a well log has been sent in by the driller, but there's no information about the pump that was installed in the well. Quite often that's because horizontal well was installed by the driller, but the property owner installs the pump at some time after the well was completed, and they never submitted the pump information. The violation notices, those are more serious violations for watersheds where there isn't enough water to authorize the use as proposed, as operated. So we've sent out 23 of the first violation notices. If we don't get a satisfactory response after the first violation notice, we send out a second violation notice. And we've been able to successfully close 9 of those violations as a result of working with the property owner and getting them to come back into compliance with Part 327. One of the things we also do, Jill Van Dyke, my geology specialist, works with the Eagles Drinking Water and Environmental Health Division. I'm doing what we call pre-screening review for a proposed new or an increased public water supply use. Essentially, it's the equivalent of doing a site-specific review for a municipal water supply. So we've authorized, well, we've passed our review, and then we let Drinking Water know, and they go ahead and officially issue the permits under Safe Drinking Water Act, one of their statutes. So Jill's completed 3 of those reviews so far. Caledonia Township and City of Hillsdale passed, and the Village of Mendon wanted to increase their use, and that was denied. Currently ongoing, we've also been working Water Resources Division and Drinking Water Division, working with Spring Arbor Township and also the City of Grand Ledge. So those are ongoing reviews right now. The water use program is working remotely. I'd say roughly about 90% efficiency. All of our staff have secure VPN connections to link us to the state's shared computer networks. As you can imagine, with the state of Michigan being one of the largest employers in the greater Lansing area, you get everybody on the network at the same time, things can slow down. So that's where the 10% efficiency loss comes in, is we're having network connection problems, or maybe ArcGIS is functioning at a glacial pace, pre-global warming glacial pace. We're able to either use our laptops or staff, if staff don't have a laptop available, they've been authorized to take their desktop computers home with them to work. Your best bet to reach water use staff is to try us by email, because right now I'm the only water use staff person that has a state issued iPhone. So what that means is for the rest of us, they have to check their voicemail on their desk phones remotely and then return the phone call. So that's a built-in delay. So your best bet is to try us by email. And on the water use webpage, michigan.gov/water use, there is a listing of the staff and our emails. We're using teleconferences or web conferences like Microsoft Teams, what we're using right now, to conduct most of our face-to-face meetings. Non-essential travel is prohibited, which delays some of our field work, like doing stream flow measurements. And we're hopeful that the working remotely and travel restriction orders will be lifted before the height of the irrigation season and the summer low flow stream season, so we can get back out there in the field. Okay, I've got some good news and some bad news when it comes to personnel issues. First, the good news. As you can see from the site-specific review metrics, Clay and Nathaniel are now seasoned SSR staff, and our newest SSR hires, Mike Osier and Alex Pink, are progressing nicely along their learning curves, so they're able to help Clay and Nathaniel do some of the compliance reviews. When I talk about a compliance review, when we first get a site-specific review request, and one of the first things we do is look at the affected watersheds and try to compare large quantity withdrawal registrations with well log records to the water use reporting data. And frequently things don't match up. We may find unregistered wells or withdrawals that are in a different location or reporting different water pumping volumes, or something is different. So having to get those lined up. As you can see from our compliance metrics, Hannah Arnett and Christopher Gothberg have both just hit their 6-month marks. They're making great progress at discovering violations and working with the property owners to bring them back into compliance with Part 327. So that's the good news. The new hires are progressing nicely along the learning curve. Now, the bad news is that our Geology 12 vacancy for another groundwater modeler position to provide some groundwater modeling support to Jill Van Dyke, that was affected by the hiring freeze, and that vacancy was pulled. It's too soon to tell how long this hiring freeze is going to last, or whether we'll be able to repost that position in the future. So stay tuned. So that's it for my agency update. Are there any questions that have come in, Laura?
Go ahead with any questions.
Okay, Jim, this is Dave Hamilton. I've got two things. First, I'd like to say congratulations on the reduction of the backlog to 14 and getting SSR, so you've got 88% within 10 days. That's a fantastic accomplishment, and very glad to see that. The second thing I have is a question. You said that there's you had 23 violation notices. I just want to make sure I understood. Are these violations where someone didn't register and so you found them and you end up getting them registered and into the system, or were they went over the registration amount?
Those are, if we send out a violation notice, those are more serious violations. The compliance communications that I talk about, there's two types. There's amended registrations, so a withdrawal was put into, installed and or operated differently than what was authorized by either the tool or a site-specific review. And by the statute, the property owner is supposed to notify Eagle of those differences, basically to give us a chance to double check and make sure that there's no problem. Frequently that is not done, so a lot of times we're finding these things out well after the fact. And if there is enough water available to authorize the existing use, we're able to go ahead and amend that registration, send that out to the owner. So that's one type. The other type of compliance communication is that well logged with no missing pump information, where we contact the property owner and ask them to submit the missing pump information, and we update, go from there. So when we send a violation notice out, that's a more serious matter where there isn't enough stream flow available in the watershed to authorize the existing use. So then there's different options that the property owner can do to address that. Maybe they have baseline capacity or other registered withdrawals that in the same watershed that they can adjust their use to free up water to go ahead and authorize the withdrawal that's in violation. That's one option. They can hire a consultant to go out, collect additional data, maybe show that there's more stream flow available, or provide additional information about the geology and show that the aquifer that they're pumping is in fact not connected to streams. Or they can form a water user group and try to get other water users to adjust their use to free up enough water. They could apply for a permit under Part 327 with preventative measures to prevent an adverse resource impact, or they could properly abandon the withdrawal. So there's a number of different options that they have available to them.
I guess, Jim, I'm just trying to get a feel for what's actually happening. I understand the issues. It sounds like you're able to pretty much work people into the existing system, and it looks like you're getting most of your violations taken care of. Is that a fair interpretation of what you're saying?
Yeah, yep, that's a pretty accurate assessment.
All right, thank
you.
So
the majority of the violations that we discover, we're able to bring back into compliance with no major problems there.
Hey, Jim, Doug Needham here. So you said there was a couple municipalities that were able to get permits, but you mentioned that the village of Mendon was not. Just kind of curious as to why that their request for an increase was denied.
Basically, their increased use would have been likely to cause an adverse resource impact. So that's the case where we let Drinking Water Division know that, yeah, their use as proposed would be likely to cause an adverse resource impact, and then go back to the drawing board working with Drinking Water and the municipality to see if can we modify their use to find something that will still meet their needs and avoid causing an adverse resource impact. Or other examples, maybe they wanted to have multiple wells and we're only able to authorize one or two of them, or we might only be able to authorize a modified pumping schedule, or see if they can change the location or the depth of the well to reduce the impact.
Okay, so you've thrown out a lot of things there, and I guess the thing is, if they were going to cause an adverse impact, that's one thing, but if we're only allowed to authorize so many wells for them, that's another. Is that an area, I guess, of the state of concern? You know, I mean, I know Ottawa County is one that we've got concerns with. I'm just trying to, in my head, wrap around, do we have other hot spots coming up? I mean, there was, I would assume, the site specific and all the in-depth before denial takes place. Is this denial because of too many, or denial because of not enough, or an adverse impact?
That's probably a question that would be best answered by Jill Van Dyke. So I guess we'd be happy to talk with you further offline and get into more detail about that.
Okay, that'd be good. Just so we get an idea of really what's going on around the state would be helpful.
Okay.
All right, any additional questions for Jim? I'll put out one more ask for folks on the phone because I know sometimes it takes a little longer to unmute your system. Any questions for Jim before we move on?
Hey, Laura, this is Jim Ostrowski. Just to remind you that for people on the phone, if you're just calling on the phone to unmute yourself, remember you just hit *6. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. So hit *6 if you want to unmute yourself and ask any questions you've got before we move on. All right. Hearing none, let's move on to Abby and an update from MDARD on agricultural water use reporting.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Yeah. So the main update that we have is we had some issues with water use reporting this year. Not only the new database, but the reporting system interfaces with my login, and my login happens to also be the interface with the unemployment insurance program. So as you can imagine, with the influx of, well, a lot of loss of jobs due to COVID and the influx of inquiries related to unemployment, the system was overwhelmed. And there was at least, I'd say, a week to 10 days where folks who wanted to report water use couldn't access the system, or were being thrown out of the system, or their data was being completely lost. So we made the decision to extend formally the reporting due date until July 15th. So I sent notices out to people who had not yet submitted to the database, indicating that this extension was in place, and to encourage them to go back onto the system and report. And of course, if they have any other issues, that they would contact either me or Robert Pigg for assistance. That's pretty much it. It's been a debacle. That's all I can say. Yeah. So any questions about that?
Abby, this is Jim. What was the date again?
July 15th.
Thank you.
Or excuse me, I'm sorry, June 15th. Yeah, thanks for asking that. I had to check myself. So we would still have our data to you, to Andy, you know, when he normally asks for it. There shouldn't be a delay there.
All right. Well, thanks, Abby. I know that's come to as a relief to a lot of growers. We were getting a lot of concerns and questions, and passed some of those on. So we appreciate the department being understanding about that and trying to deal with the problems as best as possible. Any questions for Abby before we move on to committee updates?
Hearing none.
All right, I am hearing none. So let's move on to our subcommittee updates. The first one I've got on my list is the Data Collection Committee. Brian Burrows, if you are ready, you can just say to advance your slide in order to go to the next slide so that we can show your information that you submitted, and otherwise go ahead.
Great. Hello, everybody. There are really no slides. There's just one placekeeper slide, so you don't have to worry about advancing anything. Hopefully everybody has received a written update from our committee. It's a couple-page long document that just tries to, in a little bit of detail, tell you what the data committee has done so far. I'll give you a very high-level summary right now. And if any of you have questions, obviously we'll answer those, but you can always get a hold of myself or Tom Zimnicki after the meeting as well for more detailed questions. We've met several times. We immediately started reviewing all of the past recommendations from the environmental monitoring and the inland lakes and work groups from the previous report. started doing some, immediate work prioritizing, and then we've spent time in our meetings, maybe 20 to 40 minutes on just discussing the details of each of the previous recommendations, just to make sure that we all understood and had a common understanding of which things had been done, which things needed to be done, and what was going to be involved in getting them the rest of the way done. So from that point, you would see in our report that the committee has come up with a priority ranking of the previous recommendations. In general, what you'll see is that we've decided that the highest priority items seem to be a cluster of them about filling data needs, both stream flow, groundwater, geology, kind of all kinds of data needs, filling them in critical areas and filling critical gaps statewide. And then really the other big one is about the need for a water data management framework in Michigan, something that can recognize all of the different databases that we have, but also the critical gaps in those, and create some new databases to fill those gaps and make sure that they're all linked together so that our water quantity and water quality management needs are taken care of. And so those are really the cluster of the most important to us, but there are many other ones that we found to either be partially complete or largely complete, but just need a bit more discussion to really finish them 100%. And so what I think you can expect out of our committee is that we're going to be largely focused on the previous recommendations, and we will be getting to work on the highest priority ones, and also sprinkling in working on a few of the moderate ones that perhaps 1, 2, 3 meetings, and we might be able to come back to the committee, the full council here, with recommended solutions to finishing them. Other than really working on a bunch of the past recommendations, we will pick up a couple of new things here and there. One of those examples would be inviting Elle from the DNR to review and discuss the stream check tool with the group. So really where we're at now is Tom has scheduled the next several months worth of meetings, and by the end of the week I'll send out a proposed set of agendas on what we should work on in each of those meetings for the next couple of months for everybody to review and comment on. That's a pretty complete picture, I think, from the data committee.
Yeah, and this is Tom. Just the one kind of housekeeping. I'll share the meeting dates with the department, and then that way, Chris, if we want to post those somewhere, if we're still posting those, we can give some more advance notice on that.
Brian, this is Tammy Newcomb. Have you had anyone from the DNR participating in your work group?
Thus far, I do not believe so, Tammy. Thus far, I do not believe so.
I think we'd really appreciate being part of the conversations. In the past, we've at least staffed one person at least as a resource person on all of the work committees, but Tom's point, we're not seeing the meeting notices or getting invitations. So we'd really like to be there to help you in terms of resource. So if we could somehow link up notification of the meetings with me, is fine. We'll make sure to have someone there for you.
Perfect. The easiest way is that we'll add you onto it right away, and then you can figure out the best way to distribute that with your.
Good, thank you.
And I guess I'll just ask for the Eagle staff who are on the phone, for those subcommittees that are sending you or including you in meeting notices, are those getting posted to the website?
Laura, this is Chris Alexander. We post them when we're made aware of them. And so I think that we're not made aware of all of them. So I think we've kind of struggled a little bit with trying to make sure that we get all of the meeting notices. So I'm just taking a few notes now to see how we might, better organize this so that way everybody knows about the meetings, and then we have one spot to put them. So I'm open for ideas, but for right now, as a follow-up item, I've got a note to look into this further.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions for Brian or Tom? I thought I heard somebody start to talk. Can you? But you might have remuted yourself by accident.
It's Buddy Sebastian. I'm looking through your notes on this committee, and there's a lot of stuff involving well drillers. When are you planning on bringing them in on these work groups? I think we need to be on top of it because I see a lot of red flags on our side already that maybe that might need to be done, but the well drilling community is going to fight back on really hard. I can tell just by looking at them.
Sure. Thanks, buddy. So I'll be as kind as I can be and remind everybody that at the beginning council meetings, everybody was invited to participate in every single committee, and we asked for people to email us who they would like on each one. That remains wide open.
Gotcha.
So far the committee has been everybody who wanted an email that said that they wanted to be on it. That's open door. So the first time you send me a name and say, I want Mike, I want myself, I want so-and-so, open door. Everybody's invited.
Gotcha. We'll take care of that. Thank you.
You bet. You bet.
Other questions for Brian or Tom? All right. Well, thanks, guys. Appreciate your update. If anybody thinks of anything later on, you can send me a quick chat if you want, or just let us know, and we'll make sure we're going to have another comment period. So if you think of anything later, it's not your last chance to do it. Let's move on to implementation strategies. Doug, if you don't mind giving that update.
Sure. So as we reported in our last meeting, we did go through, if we can go to the next slide, we did go through and re-ranked the 35 items that were put into a high impact, high effort, or high urgency in those categories. And then we asked the committee members to rank them via voting. And we ended up getting these 5 I guess categories or action items that kind of rose to the top. And so we did a lot deeper dive at our last committee meeting on the ones that received the 5 votes and ones that received the 4 votes. And so those were sent out to the committee prior to the meeting. If we can go to the next slide. And going into those, these were ones, and when I'm done, I actually want to have some good candid discussion from the whole council as to how we can continue to proceed forward. Because looking at the old recommendation from the December 12th, 2014 report, it was to make the WAT registration number required field in WellLogic. Well, Eagle says it's an optional field, but it's not mandatory in at this time. So as we go back and forth saying, well, if it's going to be mandatory, right now it is a requirement of the owner of the well and not the well driller. As Buddy kind of mentioned, we said, well, geez, there might be some concerns with other groups. As we talked in our committee, we said, well, do we really need funding for this if it's just going to be a mandate to make this a mandatory checkbox? So the idea was that we develop a work group with a variety of individuals and interest represented to discuss possible changes and modifications. So at this point, this was one of the highest ones that we recognized as the Implementation Strategies Committee. Really doesn't have a funding cost, but it does require time and effort from a number of individuals, including Eagle staff. And this is why I want to come back to this when I'm done. So if we can go to the next slide. Next one, again, work with stakeholders to develop criteria describing required features of groundwater flow models to be used in water withdrawal assessment process, focusing on stream flow depletion. This has been discussed as part of Michigan's Hydrologic Framework and is being addressed by the Models Committee. So this is one being discussed outside of ours. But there needs to be a process developed by Eagle with input from committee members on how to incorporate this into the models. So from that, we said, well, really, Eagle would have to develop a baseline criteria as to what is required if new ideas and methods are proposed. Eagle will reference approved test methods and set minimum requirements. Once drafted, the criteria will be presented to the Water Use Advisory Council for review. Again, no legislative effort, but Eagle staff time. So if we can go to the next one. These were all, these three right here were ones that received the highest votes, again, from our implementation committee. This one is the formation of the Michigan Hydrologic Framework, basically. This has been discussed quite a bit in the recommendation, and I'll read it for those on the phone. A database be created to gather and collect data on glacial geology, static water levels, and aquifer characteristics collected by state and federal agencies, as well as by universities and private industry. It should utilize a common set of accepted geologic and hydrogeologic terms and fields. Organizations or agencies collecting this data should have the ability to submit information to be entered into the database, and the data submitted shall conform to state program requirements. This database should be publicly viewable. So as we were discussing this, we said, well, really what we have to do is we have to develop a framework, and we have to get an idea of really what is the conceptual framework for what this Michigan Hydrologic Framework would be. Eagle reported to us that there is $100,000 allocated from Clean Michigan Initiative. Not sure if it's still available given all of the funding issues that we're facing right now with the pandemic. But the idea was this could be used by the council and just kind of come up with an idea on what type of framework. Let's kind of determine, working with stakeholders, how should we store and utilize both water quality and quantity information. So the idea there is, and I don't know if this money is still available, but if this is something that we would entertain as a full council, to say, hey, if money is available that we could use it from, Eagle's funds from this Clean Michigan Initiative, is this something that we should move forward with? So again, keeping that in mind, I want to just hit on the last two real quick. So if we can go to the next slide. Next one, these were still really high ranking from our discussion, but this one, the recommendation was the process for checking the compliance of as-built well construction details with the WAT and/or SSR registrations of groundwater large quantity withdrawals. It should be automated. Discrepancies between these should be flagged for follow-up by staff. So Eagle did inform us that there is a need for WellLogic to communicate with the WAT tool and MDARD reporting data. It would be beneficial to have flagging priorities. This improvement would speed up the time it takes for Eagle staff to ensure that the installation details match the authorized details. So this was a process improvement really for, and it will help Eagle staff. So again, on that one, we said, well, we're not really sure of a cost, but what we should do is form a work group with well drillers and DTMB and various other groups to develop a system as how something like this should be accomplished. Once we do that, then we would determine a cost and really what would be kind of determined what path should we move forward. And if we can hit the next one. Next slide. The final one that we have was EM 2.4. Says DEQ should use high quality data it receives, acquires, or collects from data submitted to the groundwater database and integrate that data into SSRs, develop numerical models to better understand the hydrogeology of certain areas and develop better tools to predict stream flow depletion in those areas. Collection of this data and using updated models can ultimately inform and upgrade the screening tool once sufficient data is collected for the associated watershed management areas. Right now, as you recall, any data that the model uses is kind of an average for the area. And if there's more kind of better knowledge that we could have, that we could put into each of these water management areas, that would certainly help the tool and potentially lower the need for SSRs to be conducted. So again, Models Committee is planning on bringing this to the full council with a plan and cost. So that is something that they are discussing. So now as we go forward, the next slide is these are the 5 topics that we have been focusing on, and they are all just past recommendations. But there were 70 to begin with. We narrowed it down to 35. We have since now boiled it into about 5. About almost all of them, the 3 of them weigh very heavily on needing Eagle staff and involvement and input in order to kind of move this going forward. So what I'm hearing, and I know is, being on hearing models and data, each of those committees are going to also come with recommendations. And I guess my question is, one, are we on the right path looking at just trying to look at the old, the 70 items that were identified a few years ago, trying to have the cream of the crop rise so that we're addressing the most important ones. But again, we need input from other committee members, which is happening, because I know sitting on other subcommittees, they are talking about it and they are planning on moving things forward. But at the end, I really want to focus on how many items do we want to address. We realized 70 was too many, and it was so many that Eagle staff said, you know what, you gave us too daunting of a task, and we really have no idea which ones to start working on. And I think with that overloading of ideas, that it actually made progress stand still. Again, how much funding are we seeking? We don't really know, given the current budget, how much we're going to be asking for. Some of our ideas that we kind of rose to the top were really just collaborative and discussions, and only required people's time right now, maybe not as much money. And what are some of the other factors that we should consider? So those, I guess, are the questions that are posed here in future direction. Hearing the input in the discussion that we've had from our implementations committee, hearing, we've got the models committee coming up. Brian talked about data. There's other things that we should be addressing. What are we as a council thinking is the way we should address all of these items?
Doug, this is Dave Hamilton, and I appreciate your presentation in it. When I looked at it ahead of the meeting, it really struck me as how much overlap there is between what you're thinking, what we're thinking of models, and what's being thought in data. And I think we do need to do a better job of trying to separate things out a little bit. So let me at least give you some of my thinking on it, and we can more council members can talk about this. One of the things that I view the implementation committee as being responsible for is trying to look at the big picture and help try to sort through what are priorities from, a whole. And so you may say, hey, there's this one from data and this one from models. We think they're really high priority. You just make sure, that you're coordinated with models and with data and that they're working on it so that when they're done, you've got what you think you need for implementation. A couple of the other ones that you pointed out, it's like they are orphans. They are, administrative detailed process. The department hadn't picked it up. I think we as a council are trying to encourage that to be picked up. You're pointing out it's going to put a load on the department, but I think that if we think that this priority, we're going to ask the department to please share that load and make that a priority because we think these are important things for the program. So I view that as kind of a separate category where I think your direct involvement does help facilitate it, making it happen.
All right, thanks, Doug. Thanks, Dave. How about questions, discussion? What are you guys thinking?
John Yellow Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, sure can.
Okay. All right. Doug, thank you very much for the update. And just as Dave had pointed out, there's some crossover here with the groups. That includes Brian as well as Dave's group. And so we've got common issues, but probably fundamentally the real issue is that we need a database, and that's very true. And I have to go back 2.5, 3 years when MGS, the survey, completed a program called Groundwater Strategy, and Eric Chatterson, Christine, I think he still works for you. He was managing over that, and we had presented a case to all of the division officers saying what we need to do about a database. At that time, just a rhetorical comment, there was no time, no money to try and do something. And I think that now we need to think about it through the council here to try and do it. So we do have places where there is valid, and I say valid geologic data, because we know that a lot of the data, particularly the well logic data, we know it from our program that first of all, it's the locations, but also it's a general information. But the whole point is that we do have places where we can get geologic information from the databases, but much of it is in paper files. And so the state has gone through the OCR process to scan a lot of that, but it needs to be pulled out. And so that'd be part of the discussion that we have is where do we think it's important? And rather than doing statewide, we need to look at areas of high importance, high relevance. And that's some of the things that we have talked about in the modeling committee, as well as in the data committee, that let's show some examples of where it can work, where we can get the data. And that's what I'd like to suggest, that we work together as a subcommittee of the committee to go ahead and try and pull that together, because there is factual data out there, and then we need to find out how we can most effectively pull that out, because you can't have senior level people pulling data out, but you can't have people who know nothing pulling data out either, because that leads to no real defined quality data. So bottom line is, Doug, thank you very much for pulling that together, as Dave said, and we'll see how we can pull it together with the two committees that I am on, our data as well as the modeling committee. And there is a tie, if you will, with the implementation, and you were on that last meeting that we had as well, Doug. Thank you.
So one of the things on EM 2.1, this slide was the Michigan Hydrologic Framework. And John, I'm not sure if this really kind of fits into kind of location specific, but I do want to know from Eagle's perspective, is that 100,000 still a potential that we could use from Clean Michigan Initiative? And is that something that we as a full council want to start working with? And on that one, the action was request that dollars be used with various stakeholders to develop a conceptual framework on how to store and utilize both water quantity and quality information. So that seems to be maybe, John, what you just said, maybe it's the beginning part of how we can start in one area, make it work, and then figure out how to make that go statewide. But one request is, is that how we want to use the money? So Eagle, is that money still available?
Well, and Doug, sorry, this is Tom. I have like an additional question to that I figured it'd be easier for Eagle maybe just to answer it all at once. So I also had a question about the CMI money, and one, if that's still available, and two, if that is the rest of the money within the water use program that CMI still has money left over on. And then the other question is, I thought in one of the previous supplementals, I think maybe 2 ago, there was a few $1 million that went into like essentially IT and tech upgrades to allow for at least what it was discussed as is like better collaboration between interdepartmental databases with GIS layers. But then there was some conversation about how that could be used to improve some of the mapping around groundwater issues. And so I'm wondering kind of what the status of that is, and if there have been any changes with that money that kind of further facilitate either the hydrologic framework or some other type of kind of comprehensive database.
This is Christine Alexander with Eagle. I can answer a little bit about the $100,000. We talked a little bit about this with Dave Hamilton just, I guess over the past. We're still trying to get some clarification on the intent of that money. We I think, share the desire to use it. We just need to make sure that it was not earmarked for something else. And what I mean by that is that the money was supposed to go toward one purpose. We were trying to get clarification on, was it really intended for that purpose, or can we use it in this way perhaps? So I don't have an answer for you on that today. We're still waiting. We just recently re-asked that question. So I apologize for not having a clear answer, except that we're still waiting to see if we can in fact tell you or give you the green light. Tom, I don't know how to answer your question as far as the larger pot of money. I don't know the answer to that at this point.
So Chris, this is Teresa Seidel. I'm also on the phone.
I was looking for you.
I'm just lurking in the background. So a couple things. Chris is right. The $100,000 that was originally put into an appropriation 2 years ago had no earmark for it. And then when we asked what it was for, every group that wanted access to it came forward and identified that there was an earmark for it. But there actually wasn't one. And so we're trying to get clarification that we can actually use the $100,000 towards something with the Water Use Advisory Council. We think that's the appropriate place to put it. We just need authorization to do that. The CMI dollars, much of the CMI dollars are being used to assist with having the coordinator and helping us with keeping the council up and going. So there's not a lot of CMI dollars left in there anyway. And the intent is to use them up by the end of the year. The larger pot of money that you're referring to, Tom, was never an agency dollars. Those were dollars that were put into Department of Management and Budget with the intent of looking for ways to get some kind of group coordination. Unless you're thinking of dollars that were part of Renew Michigan to stand up a GIS framework for Eagle, which that is starting to happen. But I don't think there's a great link with that back to the council and the work that the council is doing. I think the best bet right now is to try and obtain the $100,000 that was set aside that originally had no earmarks and get that to the council for use and prioritization of the work that you want to do. Does that help?
Yep. So I guess on that, we'll just kind of table this discussion until we know if that is available.
Yes, and we keep trying to get a straight answer. Obviously, with everything that's happening right now, I can't even tell you what my pot of money is going to look like tomorrow. So we're still pushing to get that money assigned into Water Use Advisory Council. We'll keep pushing hard to get that because, like I said, we do agree. We think that's the best place for it. But the budget is a daily conversation for us, and where we're going to be, and trying to just keep everybody in their seats as much as possible right now. So as soon as we have clarification, we'll get back with you.
Okay, thank you.
And-
So I guess that's where, so we'll continue to gather input from the various committees and put them in some type of systematic order. I don't know if we really need to go back into any more of the 35 that we have sifted from to get down to these 5, unless committee members or other subcommittees feel that ones that we aren't addressing need to be addressed, and they funnel that to us. But our goal is to have some type of hierarchy when we're all done that says, if we get $1 million, these are the projects that we would like. If we get so many Eagle staff commitment hours, this is what we would like to have done. So as a council, we can really help steer, and as Dave said, hopefully things don't fall by the wayside, that we can keep up on a few of those recommendations and make sure they get done.
I'd like to bring up another comment, if I could, John Yelich here. And it has to do with training. I'm the newbie here. I've only been in the state, back in the state 7 years, but 6 years ago, I went and said that we needed to start training the drillers and how they put common terms together. And so I've done that almost every year at the Well Drillers Conference, and then we've had other conferences where we've done that, so that the well drillers at least were putting in standard terms and also using colors, because from a geologic perspective, the colors have a fair amount to do with which glacial system, which actual lobe we're actually dealing with. So colors are important. But where I'm going now is that I also approached, and I'm a member of the AIPG, which is essentially the professional geologists in Michigan, of which Michigan is 3rd in the country with the total number of AIPG members, over 450. And I had approached them over a year ago about all drilling that's done for any kind of environmental site or anything else is essentially done by geologists or geological engineers. And that should we have a standard format or a location for that data to reside? And so this was not pushed very hard before, but I started pushing it again about almost a year ago. And so at the meeting, which has now been canceled, the AIPG has an annual meeting up in Roscommon, and I was going to present a program, a process by which the geologists would go ahead and standardize their information. Now remember this, if you've dealt with the RRD sites or anything else, that data is put into a certain format for the RRD program. Is that it would mean that they would have to have some other geologic information put together in a table in a database. And I was proposing many years ago, the database should be part of WellLogic. It should be another geologic system that's there because it corresponds with a well. But that was denied because most of the drilling that's done for RRD or contaminated sites is not in WellLogic. So right now, I think that what I'd like to do is to propose that we go back to something that I had proposed, which is standardization, which the geologists agree to wanting to do because they don't use WellLogic. And so they want to have some place where they can have open file data. And of course, the question was raised, well, is this confidential information because it was a consultant's report drill for a client? And we're trying to move past that to put it just as geologic data. So where I want to go with this is that if we have the ability to do it, that we go ahead and recognize that going forward, we need to have some standardization. Going backwards is going to be a lot of work to go back, but going forward, we try and do something with the drilling community to have something that's standardized, and there's going to be in WellLogic, but then have the professional geologists, geological engineers have a database that they're preparing too, that is for the benefit of the state, that is just geologic data, and see if we can get an interpretation or reading on whether or not that data is something separate from what they're doing for a contaminated site. So having said that, that's what I'd like to think that we talk about in the modeling committee as well as the others, to try and come up with some standards and working with professional geologists in the state to get a committee there. And I can reach out to a couple people. I happen to know one that's going to be president soon. I think it's Sarah Pearson, but to ask her whether or not we can get a subcommittee to work on this, because I think it's important for everything that we're doing. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's water quality or PFAS, whether it's water abundance, but it also has to do with a whole lot of things, getting some standard geologic information together.
John, this is Teresa Seidel again. I think Eagle fully agrees with that and will be happy to support in any way we can. We need to have consistent data across the board, whether it's a drinking water well, something going on in our RD, something being done for waste management division or materials management division now, or in the surface water arena. We are vitally missing that component.
I'd like to see what we can do, Teresa, as we go forward in our meetings right now. And of course, having the division, your division involved in this would be great, to go ahead and say this is what we should be doing. And I believe we'll get the geologic community working with us too.
This is Buddy Sebastian. I got a comment on that. A couple things. Number one, I agree with you. I think that the two points I want to make on that is that the geologist data is going to be more accurate right out the gate, because it's not always the licensed or registered well driller that's on the drilling rig. It's usually an employee in probably 70% of the case. So that the data that the geologist will be putting in will be more accurate. Number two, if there is pushback from the geology community that, well, it's private information, that information is no more private than my contract with a homeowner drilling a well on their private property. So really, in our mind, well drilling community, who cares? Big deal. It's no different. I mean, I have a contract with an individual to drill a well. It's their property, but I still have to share that information with the state, and it's public. So should any geologist. So those are the two comments I have to make, and I think it's going to help the whole situation. So.
All right, thanks everybody. I want to be respectful of time for the other committees we've still got to get through. Is there anything else just quick that anyone needs to get out before we move on to Models Committee? All right, great. Dave, you want to pick up the baton and tell us about Models Committee?
Sure will.
Thanks.
You know, will the slide show up?
Yep.
Okay. I guess I'll start with the first point was that we made the commitment in our last meeting. Doug was involved in it, and we were talking a little bit about how do we prioritize recommendations. And we agreed that as Models Committee, we will prioritize our recommendations as when we and get them to the Implementation Committee so they consider it as part of the overall package. So we will be doing that. It's our intention that we kind of want to get together a whole package before we prioritize it for the year. Just one quick comment on the earlier discussion. The $100,000, it would be really good if that does become available. And if it goes into the work generally of the Michigan Hydrologic Framework, I agree work needs to be done on the database, and that can be helpful. There's also similarly, there's some work that can be done on the model side that would be helpful. And I think we may be able to do some things on both that are relatively low budget amounts that will help move us forward. So I think we'll need to look at that money if it develops pretty carefully. But I think it can be very useful seed money, and that we can put it to good use. So I still don't see anything on the screen, but I'll keep going. We do have a recommendation from the Models Committee, and that is, oops, right here, is to update the water withdrawal assessment tool user interface to display registration information. Now, this is one of the things we had identified that would be good to do. It's actually a relatively low cost thing to do. And there's a lot of information that's in the tool on registrations, on their individual impact, on their cumulative impact within the water management area, on the current status of the water management area. And none of this information is available to the user or easily available to the department. So there's a relatively simple fix that would do that, and that's what this proposal would do. And so we want to recommend it. Now, it would result in more information for users. It would also save Eagle time, staff time, which translates to dollars as well. So there would be cost savings. Now, we're having a hard time coming up with a cost estimate for this, so we're going to hold off. We expect that there are several things that we'll be recommending that will require DTMB, that's the State Department that handles technology, that they will have to do the work because they are the administrators of this database. And those of us who have been involved with this organization for a while know that they're slow and very expensive. So we're not looking forward to this, but at some point we need to deal with them. And we'll need to get a cost estimate. But our proposal is wait till we have a package and we can go to them, ask for estimates on the whole package. And there actually may be cost savings if we're doing several different things on the tool itself. So the write-up was provided. Again, I don't expect approval today, but I did want to get it out and get it in the hopper for when the council is ready to consider more recommendations like this, that they'll be ready to go. The next thing that I have is that we've been working on aquifer test guidelines. And this is something that the department had developed, and they came to the council and asked for some recommendations. And that came to the models committee. We set up a work group. Jim Nicholas has chaired that work group. And he called together several consultants, I'm not sure the number, 5 or 6, I think, as well as several people from Eagle. And they've had some very good dialogue. And Jim has come up with a draft, and it is by no means final, but I at least wanted to let you know we've got a draft. And there's a couple main themes that came out of this draft. And the first one is that the consultants really need information, local information that Eagle has available, and there needs to be communications improved and going on between the consultants and Eagle. The second thing that came out from the consultant side is that they really don't want a lot of requirements for work plans and other detailed things like that imposed on them. And as the discussion has gone on, it looks like if there could be better dialogue so that consultants both know what information Eagle has and maybe better understanding of what Eagle is looking for, that kind of preliminary dialogue would be very valuable. And in the long run would help end up with a better product when the consultants are done. If the department does want to specify certain things as being required as part of the work, there really should be some kind of explanation as to under what circumstances and why this information is needed. The consultants really push back on what they consider to be blanket requirements without good justification. So if things can be narrowed down to specific situations and why that information is needed, the consultants indicated they would be glad to do that. So I think those are the main things. So communication, ahead of time, especially making sure expectations are very clear from the department's point of view, improving maybe the checklist so that again, what needs to be in the reports is very clear. So that information was given to the department. They're going to look at it, and I expect there will be more dialogue. And that's good. And my hope is that Jim's work group will continue to work with the consultants and with the department to come up with a better product that will provide the department what it needs and the consultants what they need as well. So we will continue to work on that. The next item is that we are working on several of the technical things. Doug alluded to some of that. So we're looking at ways to update storage coefficients and transmissivity that's used in the tool. This is really detailed stuff. For most people, who cares? But they're very important details that really affect the answers that the tool gives. So what we're looking for, are there places in the state where we have the information and the justification that we can say that, hey, we should use a different number for these in these areas? And then this is what we would do if that's the case. So we want to work through that. We want to make sure that we understand what the implications would be, that if there are any areas of the state that we would do this, we would also simulate it to make sure that we know what the impact would be. So we're working on those things. And so I don't have anything to give you other than to let you know that those are in the works. Another thing that's in the works that you don't hear too much about is we have another work group that's been pretty much a freestanding work group that is chaired by Troy Zorn with DNR Fisheries. And they're looking at downstream accounting. The group is making some pretty good progress, coming up with some really good ideas of things to look at. So I anticipate that maybe our next meeting we'll be able to have an update from that group. So we can look forward to that. The final thing that I want to touch on is for information for the council. It's a document that I prepared. I consulted with a couple other members from the Models Committee before I drafted it, and I've run it by the entire Models Committee now that it's been drafted. Giving it to the council not as a final recommendation, but more as something that something for us to think about. And what this is looking at what's the process to update the water withdrawal assessment process itself, as well as a screening tool. And when we look at this program, it's a very prescriptive program. The legislature, when they wrote this, they wanted things spelled out very clearly in the law. So there's a lot of detail that's written into it, a lot of things that the department has to follow very carefully. And there were very specific requirements of things that the tool had to do. And so the department and the tool are performing accordingly. But as we all know, in the 10 plus years that the program has been running, we've all seen there areas where there can be improvements. And so what I did is I wanted to say, okay, I want to look at the law, look at the foundational recommendations that fed the law, and try to understand what were the expectations for changing the model or the databases or the data that's being used. So I went through and I pretty carefully looked at the law itself to try to discern what's specifically required, how are changes made. And I noticed as I did this, that the law also very specifically required to an earlier council's recommendations. And it said, this tool is based on these recommendations. They spelled out a number of the requirements, but there are within those recommendations things that appear to be part of, I would say, the inherentness of how this tool should be operated and maintained. So I've pulled this together, and when you have a chance to look at it, you'll see that in the definitions part of the statute, there's a lot of things are prescribed. In the operational sections of it, again, there are things that are prescribed, but there are also places where it talks about changes and how changes can be made. So I built on those, and I went back and I looked at some of the original recommendations, and it was very clear that the original council anticipated that there would be updates to this tool. There would be updates to the database. The legislation also says the same thing. And so, and there were a number of other things that the council recommended that should be done, and that there should be regular updates. In fact, that they recommended like every 5 years, certain models should be reviewed and considered. So, for example, the underlying model that's in the tool 5 years ago, our predecessor council said it looks pretty good. We're good for now. Well, guess what? It's been 5 years. We should probably look at that again. But what I did is I took the activities that the Models Committee is working on, and I went through those, and I kind of explained, based on this review of the law and the foundational recommendations, this is where I think we are. And so, for example, for one of them, it's there's no change in the function or operation. It just improves efficiency and adds transparency. This is an administrative update. No special approvals are needed. We do think it's a good idea to run it through the council, which is what we're going to do. And that, I think, is going to be a bottom line, is that if it doesn't need a legislative change, or it isn't something that goes to the Natural Resources Commission or the departmental director, that we think that at least it should come through the council, because public input is an important part of it. But I wrote through how I viewed the work that we're doing and what approvals are needed or not needed in it. What I would suggest is we're doing other things. We may want to look at it through the same kind of lens here. I'm very open to any feedback anybody has or ideas of things that I've missed or other ways of looking at it. Be glad to do that. So anyway, I'm giving this to the council as information at this point. It's something we may want to consider and use in some of our work. So with that, I will stop and answer any questions on the item I've talked about.
Any questions that anybody's got for Dave? Dave, I've got a question regarding projects to update storage coefficients, transmissivity, that sort of thing. I guess one thing I'm wondering about is how strongly is that related to projects that are collecting specific geological information about those targeted areas versus, you know, kind of creating a conceptual model or doing something sort of like what was done in Ottawa County, where where they didn't have a whole lot of ability to do on the ground data collection, and so relied a lot more on kind of other sources and a lot of modeling and estimation. I guess the concern that I've got is that if we're going to start doing things where we take regions and change around storage coefficients, transmissivity, some of the parts of the equation that determine that potential for stream flow calculation, how can we make sure that we're making those changes as accurately as possible, or at least as reflective as possible of real conditions?
That's exactly our goal, Laura, is that we want to make sure that it is. Now, you have to be careful with using site-specific information. So one well test at one location gives you information for that location. It doesn't give you information for the entire water management area. And that's what we're running into it as we're thinking about this, is that there has to be enough information that we feel comfortable that we would be able to recommend this as kind of the default value that would be used in the tool. It still can be and should be revised based on site-specific information in the site-specific review. So it is not at all taken away from that. But the idea is that if we have enough information in some parts of the state where we feel that it's justifiable to use some different numbers, why not do it? But we do need to be very careful about that. We want to make sure that the numbers are sound. They still need to be conservative. That's the philosophy of the tool. We want something to be conservative so that we're not authorizing something that would cause an ARI if you looked at it more closely. But we are looking for other ways to make these numbers more realistic. And then to what you're getting at is that we want to look at that closely, not just kind of do a blanket, oh, let's just run something and run a statewide and whatever number comes up, we'll use it. That is not our thinking at all. We want to look at this, make sure we understand it before we come to the council with a recommendation.
Can I add something to what Dave just said, which was in the last meeting that we had, is that the Geologic Survey has done detailed mapping, subsurface, surface down to bedrock in Cass County, Barry, Calhoun, and we do have specific data that Dave was talking about. And it's not just one point. We've got a number of rotosonic drill holes. We've also done sieve analysis and other things. And everybody needs to understand is that the geology of Michigan is not uniform, and it's not even uniform across any of these drainage basins. And so what we wanted to try and do, and what was suggested in the last meeting, was let's look at, and as I said just a little bit earlier, look at some pilot areas where we do have the data so that we can then say this is the kind of information that we need. Taking Dave's comment, which is being conservative, that we would look at it, and I know that Dave Lush has looked at this as well, and I've talked to him about it as well, is that if we take real factual data, go ahead and put it in and see how it looks in the new model. And of course, remember this, is that the well drillers only drill down to where there was water. There's vast areas of the state where we have an additional 50, 100, 150, 200 feet of aquifer that is still there that was never looked at because it wasn't looked at in that context. But let's take where we've got the real data, let's take some real values, because we do have the sieve analysis, we have the other things that we can go ahead and develop some coefficient numbers for an area, and not try and throw this statewide, because that's where we're at now, is taking terms that are statewide and it doesn't apply. So bottom line is, I think that we can do it. We're working on it through the both the data committee as well as the modeling committee right now, trying to identify those areas and to try and show where we can look at that data and have it looked at.
Thanks, John.
All right, any other questions for Dave before we move to new topics? All right, hearing none at this time, Pat, if you want to take over and cover what new topics committee's been talking about.
Thanks, Laura. At the last meeting, we talked about setting up a meeting for the Water Users Committee topic, and we kind of got caught a little bit behind and in the COVID response. So we didn't have one scheduled, but we do have a couple of agendas prepared. And I do have a meeting scheduled for May 5th to talk about the Water Users Group. So I've sent out a email to the group and some of the other invited guests that have interest in it. And so we're still working on that. I proposed May 5th from 10 to 11. So that may get moved a little bit depending on what other feedback I get from this email. So once we have that finalized, I'll get that over to Sherry Thalen and get that on the website so that others can participate. Laura, I do have a question for meetings going forward as far as process goes. For me and other committee members, I assume as long as we have the meeting posted through Eagle and it's an open meeting, if we use Zoom or Teams or whatever platform we choose to use, as long as we've noticed it and it's open, that we're free as chairs to go ahead and schedule meetings going forward?
Well, at the risk of saying something that Margaret will tell me is incorrect, I think that is the way that we'll move forward, that we are still compliant with Open Meetings Act, hosting a meeting through Teams or through some other online platform, so long as it's public noticed and the information about the meeting is available before it happens.
Perfect. We'll proceed along those lines then. So this Water Users Committee meeting, where we've made some. I took a look at the recommendations from the 2014 report, and there's been some progress on items 1 and 3 in that report. So item 2 is really going to be the meat of this meeting and trying to push the ball forward on getting some data together for supporting a water users group. So that's kind of the main purpose of that first meeting. So if anybody has any questions on that, feel free to email me or Jason or Kelly, and we'll be happy to plug you in. The next meeting after that, we're going to try to focus on water conservation. I need to reach out to James Cliff or Emily, somebody from that group, to talk about water conservation with respect to the compact and that report that was just completed. I thought that would be the best place to really start that conversation because there are some goals and kind of a good summary of the Michigan program that they can prepare every year as part of the compact. So that's kind of where I was planning to start looking at that. Have James or somebody come and speak to that, and then we would maybe also reference the 2014 report. So keep an eye out for that, hopefully sometime later in May or June at the latest.
Kelly or Jason, anything to add?
Nope, this is Kelly. I think Pat has done a wonderful job in putting these together and really taking a look at them. So I don't think he's missed anything.
All right. Any questions for New Topics Committee?
Say Laura. I don't hear any, so I'm going to quick throw a question that I had, or more of a comment. Sherry Thalen had put an email out earlier regarding a couple of documents, and one was this update water withdrawal assessment tool user interface to display registration information. Andy LeBaron was the investigator. I just wanted to say I totally applaud that. I was just in a meeting about a month ago, and somebody brought up this issue of how do you get this data, and so the timing of this couldn't have been any better. So I just wanted to say hats off to that, and I certainly support this project that you have laid out, and I think it'd be very valuable.
All right, good. I'll make one more call for questions for Pat or Jason or Kelly. See, I'm trying to be patient here. It takes people a while to get unmuted. It's my exercise. All right. Well, thanks everybody. I definitely appreciate the updates from the committees. Thanks for doing that, and thanks for putting this information together. At this point, I will open it up to council members, non-council members, public comment, anything that anybody would like to bring up regarding any water use topic, not necessarily stuff that was on the agenda for today.
This is John Steers from the public, if nobody else is going to go.
Sure, go ahead, John.
Thank you very much. I'll try to be as brief as I can, just looking at a few of the things that we went through today and looking at the fact that, and realizing the fact that our budget here in the state will be decimated here very soon. And I saw a little bit of hints of that during the meeting, but not really enough, I think, to apply it to the request for funding that seems to be inherent in all these meetings over the years. And we're even to the point where we're talking about $100,000, which seems kind of ridiculous at this point. But I'm not trying to get, I'm not putting anybody down for talking about it, because every dollar counts. But we're at the point where we are at, and some of the older people might be able to relate to this, that we are in the point of quite possibly a depression. So our every dollar that we spend to try to do it, we're doing on these committees and through the WAC as a whole, has to almost be looked at in a whole new way in terms of how we're going to approach the water use period here in the state. My suggestion is to break it down into about 3 categories: compliance and enforcement with fine-based revenues, because we have to go after the people that are basically stealing our resources. We have a big problem with that here in Kalamazoo with the Kalamazoo Valley bedrock issue. We have a big problem with the farmers not willing, and big users not willing to report or be transparent. We need, the second one will be measurement. We have to put every dollar that we can into finding out exactly how much water we're using everywhere and put it into a transparent database. And this third thing is transparency. We've got a whole, I don't know how many million people here in our great state who are more than willing to go out and do a lot of the work that we're talked about today in terms of keeping our users honest, in terms of telling the state exactly what's happening on the ground. We have all this great technology that we can put it forward, but we have no place to put it to. So when I talk about when everybody talks about a public database, I think that we have to have a database that not only includes all the things that everybody talked about today, but historical data and incidental data. Anything for a given area and in a given well area where we can put that information up there and have, frankly, and I said it before, the peon citizens or our young people who have got great minds to put all this things together and come to us and say, hey, maybe you've got all this great data up here on the website. It's all transparent. We're not allowing people anymore to, hopefully, during this, budget problem we have, not allowing people to be confidential and anything that has to do with water anymore. And so we put all things up there because we don't have any money, and we say, this is what happens when somebody goes and applies for a water withdrawal permit. Every bit of that water permit is transparent. The person that is making that permit has a responsibility to put it on the website. Each gallon that the user uses in this state is put daily on that website. And lo and behold, we have a very inexpensive system that we can draw from. And maybe it's not going to be the greatest system. Everything isn't going to talk with this system or the next. But we've got to do something, folks, where we just don't have any money and quit kicking this all down the road. Here in Kalamazoo, I've got a big water tank sitting right, and a lot of you probably don't live over here, but on 94 131, and I believe that goes right down to bedrock, right where a lot of people never thought we should be drilling not too long ago. I can't get any information about that well. I know nothing about what's going on there. A lot of millions of dollars were spent saying that we could do it or not, but I have no idea what's going on there. And I'll try to wrap it up here. The OMA Act, I hear people talking about the committees, and the committees, you know, we're not getting hold of this person or that person. I really would caution when we talk about giving notices for these meetings, these committee meetings, and saying, oh, well, we'll just notify it. And I think it's great. I'm not, you know, putting anybody down or anything. I'm just saying our OMA law here, Open Meetings Act law here in Michigan, is the worst in the country. We only have 18 hours to announce a meeting. I do not see any reason why we cannot put these, not to continue to have meetings like this. We cannot put them on the website. We cannot go ahead and have everything go right through that website. So more young people, frankly, I've said this in a meeting about a year or two ago, the more young people can get involved in water issues. You know, you're never going to make it attractive for them if you're not going to put the stuff out there for these young brainiacs to go out and say, well, you know what, I think I can solve that problem, you gray-haired guys that are, you know, kind of retiring to Florida and stuff, everything. I think I can solve that. And so I guess I'll conclude with, if we don't get to the point where we make this data out here, get the data out into the public, and we just tell people there is no more secrets in terms of water withdrawal or any other thing. We don't put these discussions on the web, and we don't just give these kids a chance to basically take over where we failed. We're going to have a lot of problems down the road trying to say, okay, well, we're going to get move this whole ball down the road with next to no money. And that's exactly what is going to happen in the next 6 months or so. We are going to have a rude awakening to how much money is available. And I think we better start talking about it. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, John. Any other public comments? All right, I'm hearing none at this time. Oh, hang on, sorry. Go ahead. Thought I heard somebody trying to speak there. Okay. We've got on our agenda that our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, June 23rd. Fingers crossed. We might actually be able to have this one in person, but if not, we'll plan on a remote meeting similar to this one, where we'll send out advance notice and get people online. But it is scheduled for Tuesday, June 23rd at 1 o'clock, and that's Eastern time, obviously. So we will plan on meeting with the full council then, either in person or remotely, again, depending on how the state's progressing with with its COVID response and hopefully recovery and reopening the state. And so we'll get more details out to everybody as we get closer to that date and kind of find out more details about what our requirements are going to be related to that. And at that point, that is everything that I have on our agenda. Unless there's anything else, I would take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. And rather than do a roll call, I'll just ask if there's any objection.
Frank, I second that motion.
All right. Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Laura.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Jim and Eagle staff, for helping us out with the technology on this one. I really appreciate the help, and glad everybody was able to be patient with the new technology, and hope you all stay safe and healthy, and we'll see each other again soon, hopefully. Thanks a lot.
Good job, Laura.
Thanks, Laura. Good job.
Thanks, Jim, Matt, and Christine.
Bye.
Thanks, Laura.